the idea of proof of stake goes way back, right? So that was like 2012 already. You had Peercoin as one of the first, or maybe the first proof of stake network. When the Ethereum white paper came out in 2013, it was already there, right? The idea to switch to proof of stake, even though it ended up taking a very long time. And of course, the Tendermint white paper was published in 2014 as well. The first kind of modern proof of stake networks where you'd have slashing and the kind of security guarantees were created in 2019. So it was Tezos and Cosmos, basically the first two of those networks that launched. And of course today, right, I think a huge part of the crypto economy is secured by proof of stake. You know, Chorus One, we started in 2018 as one of the first proof of stake companies, but a lot of the companies today that are, you know, prominent proof of stake started around then when Cosmos got started. So this is before the Cosmos launch. And, you know, today we run an infrastructure around 40 different networks. We, you know, before we're $1 billion staked, and, you know, have around 140,000 people or accounts staking with us. So the staking economy today, right? So you have around 109 billion that's staked right now. And if you, so the total crypto market cap is 1.2 trillion. And if you exclude Bitcoin, if you exclude the stable coins, you're down to around 500 billion. So this is around 20% of the entire crypto market cap. If you just exclude those two categories, is staked at the moment. And around 20% at the moment is in liquid staking. And I'm going to talk a bit more about liquid staking in a bit. Of course, almost all of that liquid staking portion is on Ethereum. And then if you look at the total rewards that have been paid so far is around 10 billion. And almost all of that, or, you know, the vast majority of that comes from new token issuance. And then, of course, the other categories are gas fees that people pay for transactions using chains and MEV. I think with gas fees and MEV, once again, these basically, you know, vast majority come from Ethereum, and those categories are very low on other networks where it's predominantly token issuance. So I think at this point, you know, staking has become one of the largest crypto industries. And yeah, so yeah, what's also worth noting, right, is that staking is this term that's being used, but it's being used for a lot of different types of mechanisms, right? There's a big differences in how staking works. So for example, if you just take Cosmos and Ethereum, right? In Cosmos, as we all know, you can just make a transaction, choose a validator, delegate. It's very easy. You can do it with any amount. Validators can have any amount staked with them, right? There's no limit, which is very, very different from Ethereum, where basically it's 32 ETH per node. You know, if you have more ETH, you need to spin up a new node. If you have less than 32 ETH, you can't stake it. So there's no in-protocol delegation. So there's a big differences here. And I think this is also expressed when you look at sort of the type of staking products that are being created, and that's, you know, the diversity here is changing a lot. Like, just if you look at a few of the things that we are doing, so okay, you have delegation, which we all know from the Cosmos ecosystem and you're all familiar with, and then, you know, white label validators, where basically, okay, you're running a validator on behalf of some other entity, right, on their name. So this is also one thing that happens. Liquid staking, I'm going to talk more about that. Or then kind of institutional type products where, you know, building APIs and integrating with exchanges or wallets or different types of places that have their own customers and want to offer staking, you know, in a smooth way for them. So let's talk about some of the main, you know, some of the main trends in staking at the moment. So one is liquid staking, right? Again, the idea of liquid staking has been around for a long time. I mean, we wrote a paper at Chorus One about liquid staking in 2019 that I think was the first one to sort of mention the term. But again, the idea was, actually, I think in the Cosmos ecosystem, we probably did the most to sort of, you know, explore this idea. So it was us, it was also Sunny from Osmosis who did work on that. There was other team, some teams in Korea called Everett. So there was a lot of early attempts. But if you look at it today, right, in Cosmos, actually only about 1% of the, so this is now the Cosmos Hub, right? Only about 1% of the staked value is staked through liquid staking. So this is still very small, whereas on Ethereum, it's 39%. So it's really a huge amount. And of course, so 20 out of 50 billion. Now, why is that? I think this has a lot to do with what I said before about the staking design, where on Ethereum, you had no withdrawals, and you couldn't stake less than 32 ETH, so it really drove people to using liquid staking because of how the base layer staking protocol was designed. On Cosmos, really, it's very easy for anybody to stake, right? So the reason to use a liquid staking protocol is a lot less. I think the one thing that you have in Cosmos, for example, why you may want to use the liquid staking protocol is because you say, oh, I want to reuse the collateral and I earn more yield. But of course, for that, you need to have a lot of DeFi protocols. You need to actually have those yield earning opportunities, and they're still pretty scarce at the moment. So I think that's why we have not so much adoption at the moment on liquid staking here. However, I think it's pretty clear that liquid staking is a very attractive product, and we continue to grow. Probably in the next bull market, when there's a lot of things to do with liquid staked asset, we're also going to see it grow a lot on Cosmos. And of course, Cosmos liquid staking is pretty new. We have the two main here, Stride and Quicksilver, and they've all launched within the last like 6 months roughly. But there are some interesting questions around liquid staking. One of the questions that's being debated a lot is this a sort of winner-take-all market? Are we going to see one protocol that dominates? Because if you just have one protocol, one liquid staking asset, you can have all the liquidity around it. So that's one thing that's being discussed a lot, certainly. If you look at Ethereum, where the market has been going for quite a while, you have Lido that's like very dominant. Or can we see a diversity of solutions, right? Can you see 3, 4, 5 liquid staking protocol, maybe more, that somehow all manage to thrive, which might be better from some perspective in terms of decentralization, but it might not be feasible. And then I think one thing that's also being discussed a lot on Ethereum right now, and it was discussed a lot on Cosmos in the past, is what is the impact or the kind of relationship between governance and liquid staking? So, does something like LDO become a sort of liquid stake, like a governance layer for Ethereum almost? So this is liquid staking. It's one of the most active areas, I think, at the moment in crypto. In terms of new investments, new projects, the most assets that are being kind of locked in DeFi is through liquid staking. So the second one is MEV, right? So MEV, what is MEV? So MEV, again, there's like different explanations, but one way to think about it is that a user makes a transaction, and then at some point it gets included and finalized in the block. And along that way, it goes through different stages, and in these different stages, there are opportunities to use the information or to do something, change the order, insert their own transaction, and make money that way. And of course, this has become a very prominent thing on Ethereum. That's basically the only place where MEV is really, there's significant value in MEV at the moment. But if we are going to see, crypto being widely adopted, if you're going to see mass usage, then MEV is going to be relevant on all of the chains. Actually, Cosmos is probably one of the ecosystems where, besides Ethereum, there's the most going on in MEV. And there's a lot of different approaches that are being taken in Cosmos as well. They're quite interesting. Because in Cosmos, you have a lot more control over the chain. Because you have the governance that controls a particular chain, a particular application, you can do particular things. So there's two things that come to mind. One is that you can potentially say, hey, let us try to capture the MEV as a protocol. So this is what Osmosis is doing, where they're basically having Skip as a third party write software that will capture the MEV as it happens and then kind of pay it back to Osmosis stakers. So this is one thing that's being done in Cosmos. And another thing here is that if you think of things like sandwich attacks that are sensibly negative for the users, then you could say this is damaging the chain. And on Ethereum, a validator maybe doesn't care, right? Because there's so many validators, everybody's doing it, there's no delegation. But in Cosmos, you're depending on delegation as a validator. So if people see, oh, my validator is doing something that's damaging the chain just to make some short-term profit, then that probably going to lose delegation. So I think we haven't really seen any of this harmful extraction from validators in Cosmos. And I think actually Cosmos chains are pretty well set up for that not to happen. From a validator perspective, MEV is actually pretty interesting because it's one of the only places where you can potentially differentiate, right? Where you can generate a higher return than other validators. Because if you think of the other categories, new tokens are being issued, that's a network parameter. You can't change it as a validator. And if you think of gas fees that the users pay, well, again, this is not something that's under your control. But MEV, you are able to have some influence there. So for example, we have been spending quite a lot of time on that on Ethereum, where we're trying to explore, okay, how can we, optimize the MEV returns? And here you can see us tracking sort of the MEV returns versus Lido, and doing things to generate better returns. But that's something that's pretty Ethereum specific at this point, and I don't think it's really happening on any other chain in a meaningful extent. And so I think when it comes to the future of MEV, it is really very, very open and very unclear. There's a lot of different things happening, a lot of new protocols that are being created on top, or also changes that are made to the fundamental base layer to sort of take into account MEV. And there's definitely a sort of fear around MEV that is it going to become something that's very centralized? It's controlled by a bunch of trading companies. They're integrated with validators, and they're sort of then starts to resemble what people are maybe seeing in the traditional finance space? Or do you see much more of a sort of open system where there's a lot of different participants and different markets, and it's maybe transparent and more sometimes it's called like democratic? But I think this is really very, very open, and especially also open in Cosmos. So, we've also, of course, we've also been working with DYDX on exploring how MEV could best be handled for app-specific DEX, like DYDX is, and there's going to be a report coming out on that, I think, in August. So two more. So restaking, I think, is another one of the topics that's been getting a lot of attention. And again, actually, Ethereum and Cosmos are probably the two ecosystems where this is the most the case. And what is it about? Basically, when you're staking, you're locking up assets, right? So they are on-chain, and they're sort of frozen there. And of course, there's a question. Let's say if you look at Cosmos, the Cosmos Hub, then only 5% of the amount that's being staked is actually slashable. So you could say 95% of the tokens that are being locked up, they're not really being used. And so the idea for, okay, but how do you address this, or how could you deal with this in a different way, a more efficient way, has also been around for a long time. And of course, on Cosmos, we now have two kind of concepts or two technologies that are trying to address this. So you have interchain security, and you have mesh security. Both trying to basically allow people to kind of stake their assets multiple times at the same time, and thus, generate higher returns, but also use the assets better and provide more security. And on Ethereum, you have a project called EigenLayer, which is also basically trying to create a sort of layer on top of Ethereum where people would be able to put their liquid staking tokens like staked ETH and then use that as collateral to secure additional services that validators and node operators run. So you could imagine something like Chainlink, where basically, okay, some node operators run an Oracle service, and people put up their staked ETH as collateral to guarantee the running of their Oracle service, and they're then able to earn their ETH return from staking and some additional returns from these additional services they secure. So this is very early, right, this restaking topic, but there's no question that, in the long run, this is going to become very important, and it's going to lead to capital being used a lot more efficiently. But of course, efficiently also means that we are going to increase risks, right? Because you're basically layering different levels of risk. And of course, in the sort of worst case, you could imagine some kind of cascades of failure, where you have like something breaking underneath, and then it erodes the value, and then some other protocol building on top that's relying on the same thing, all of a sudden it's no longer secured. So I think it's clear that there's risks here, but of course the big difference between the traditional financial system is that this should all be transparent and on-chain, and so we should have at least visibility into what's going on. Yeah, so that's another area. And yeah, I think we actually, Cosmos ecosystem now seeing some of the most activity here. For those who were at the Osmosis event, I think it's maybe here as well, right? Where mesh security is now being demoed, and there's some early things on that. And of course, ICS is now live with the first chains. And then final topic I want to touch on is layer 2. So layer 2, I mean, what are layer 2s, right? Layer 2s are basically blockchains that are trying to inherit the security of another blockchain. And the idea here is that you could be maybe more secure and that the security can be cheaper. So if you think of like Ethereum, right, there's a huge amount of staked value. So can you build some kind of blockchain on top of Ethereum that, leverages the security of Ethereum, but, you can scale that way, have more transactions. And of course, Ethereum had, different visions over time in terms of how to scale. And at this point, they've kind of given up the idea of scaling the base layer very much at all, and really fully betting on people building these kind of Ethereum secured blockchains on top that then provide the scalability for Ethereum. So if you think of this in the terms of staking, right, on the surface, or the sort of first side, this is a threatening thing for the staking economy, right? Because maybe you don't need staking so much anymore. But if we kind of look a little bit deeper, I think it becomes a lot less clear how this is going to interface with staking in the future. One of these is that a lot of these rollups, right, they have sequencers, or these layer 2s, they have sequencers. So they have a particular role that basically takes the transaction, orders the transactions, and puts some proof about those transactions into the layer 1. And often this is, just like one server at the moment that's doing that. And on the one hand, this can be, somewhat trustless, but on the other hand, it's also very centralized. So if you think about it, so for example, they could just turn off the server, and then no transactions are going through. So of course, this is a big challenge, not least from a regulatory perspective. Well, you could say, oh, this is not, it's just not very centralized. So I think with DRDX, actually, this is one of the main reasons why they decided, actually, we want to have a Cosmos chain instead of being a rollup, because of the centralization of layer 2s. And I think this is something that, basically everyone is aware of and people are working on. And they're trying to decentralize the sequencing. But of course, what does it look like? Now, if you decentralize the sequencing, it basically means there's like different parties that could fulfill that role of sequencing. And then you may need some sort of consensus to agree, okay, who is the party at a particular time that's doing the sequencing? And if you want to make it open so that, arbitrary parties could like kind of come in and do some of that sequencing, then maybe you need some kind of slashing or some kind of penalty. So it's very possible that kind of over time, as layer 2s are trying to decentralize, they're going to become more like layer 1s, and they're going to introduce a lot of the same things that we see in proof-of-stake networks at the moment, like consensus and some slashing. So it's kind of a little bit still quite open. First of all, how competitive are L2s going to be versus appchains? And how are L2s actually going to look like, and how different are they going to be from proof-of-stake L1s as they are trying to decentralize in the future? And I think another one is, of course, ZK rollups. Again, they bring their own properties, and they will have their own effects on this. So yeah, I think this is another big question, right? Is like, how much do L2s disrupt the kind of app chain thesis we have in Cosmos, and how do they disrupt the staking economy, and what are they going to look like in the future? And yeah, these are some of the key trends. I'm actually just at the end of my time. I think, at this point, staking economy is like one of the kind of most largest and vibrant economies in crypto. The Cosmos ecosystem has played a huge role in that. But as we've seen, There's a lot of change, right? A lot of trends that are still happening, and so I think there's no question, right, that this economy is going to look very different in the future. I think what's also the case is that from the kind of perspective of institutional investors, staking is very attractive because it's like stable, predictable, not so risky. So I think we are seeing a lot of interest that will come in as more of the financial world enters crypto is going to go through staking. So I think that's also a really great thing. So yeah, thanks so much.